But time for our guest today, presenter Simon Thomas, who's recently opened up about his problems with alcohol.
Simon Thomas was a familiar face on children's TV, hosting Blue Peter for 6 years, before leaving to pursue his passion for sports presenting. In November 2017, when his son Ethan was just 8 years old, Simon's world came crashing down as his wife Gemma was diagnosed with leukemia. Gemma died, aged just 40 years old.
I do take comfort in the fact I never had to see Gemma being told the news she wasn't going to see Ethan grow up.
Simon took time away from television to deal with his grief and focus on his son. But an unhealthy relationship with alcohol soon span out of control, and drinking became Simon's social mask, something he said he turned to as a way of dealing with his heartbreaking grief. Now, with help from friends and his wife Derrina, Simon has been sober for over a year and is looking forward to the future.
And we're delighted that Simon is joining us now in the studio. Welcome, nice to
Hello.
see you.
Nice to see you.
Obviously, Simon, you've been on the show before.
Yeah.
And we've talked about, you know, the tragic loss of your darling wife and how you and your son coped with that. All very, very difficult. But what you didn't ever discuss was a problem with alcohol. Probably because I'm assuming at that time you didn't think it was a problem. When do you think it became a problem or apparent to you that it was a problem?
It's interesting being back in this building because once upon a time this was BBC, and in a studio not too far from here I did my Blue Peter audition. I think I'm sat in the same dressing room downstairs. Those nervous feelings came back. And, you know, going on Blue Peter back in 1999 when we still got a big audience, that was a big gear change, suddenly being known by people. It was a bit of a novelty at first, but what I found quite difficult, and alcohol became my kind of go-to mask, was that I think maybe fairly unfairly, when you are in the public eye, people have a certain expectation of who you are away from the screen. And I'd go to social situations, whether it is stuff within the TV industry or just out with friends, and I had this sort of fear that people expected you to be a certain way.
The life and soul.
If I wasn't the character they saw on the television, I'd somehow be a bit of a bore. And I think over time, alcohol became that mask where I feel more comfortable in my own skin, I feel more confident. I'm always confident in front of a camera, mostly, but in social situations, I wasn't always as confident.
So when that was happening, I think a lot of people identify that. It's like you go to a party where you don't know people, you think a little drink kind of helps you along.
Yeah, a bit of Dutch courage.
Were there times when maybe even friends or people in those social situations were like, slow down a bit, mate, you know, did you ever think... Did anybody else think you were drinking a bit too much even then? Yeah,
I mean, family and friends would sometimes call me out, and occasionally I was aware of conversations behind my back, and I never liked that. You know, I think when we deep down recognise we might have a problem, we don't always appreciate other people recognising that problem and beginning to call you out on it. And I think every time people did, my reaction was like a bit of a rhino reaction. It's like you'd headbutt against it. Like, I know I haven't got a problem, I haven't got an issue. Deep down, I kind of knew I did.
Were they telling you things that you'd done the day before that weren't how you remembered them?
Occasionally. I mean, it didn't... Thankfully, in that period, it didn't get quite that bad, but they'd certainly remind you of things you'd probably regret. You know, we all do things under the influence we probably wouldn't do if we haven't had a drink. You know, most of us have been there. I certainly have loads of times, but I always reacted badly to that kind of question.
Yeah. And also, it's like this exceptional drug where it's out in the open, lots of people are doing it, it's normalised, so then it's hard to identify when it's not OK. But obviously, this life-changing event happened to you, this tragedy of losing your wife, that brought back the problems again, and you used alcohol as a coping mechanism. Is it fair to say that?
Yeah, I think it is fair, Casey, to say that, because I'd actually given up in the August of 2017. But I think when I reflect back on it, I'd done it for other people because of those conversations. And actually, on the way here, I watched the video. I follow lots of people on Instagram now doing similar things, and I follow lots of accounts that talk about sobriety. And there's a wonderful clip from Rob Lowe, the American actor, who's been sober for many, many years. And he made the same point that I made, which is, if you're doing it for your kids, if you're doing it for your partner, for your wife, your husband, your friends, you're almost destined every time to fail. And I think back in August of 2017, I was largely doing it because I knew other people were worried about me. And then when my first wife, Gemma, did die very suddenly in November of 2017, for the first 3 weeks, I just had this sense, despite everything I was feeling, everything going on, that combining alcohol with grief and shock and trauma would be a really bad cocktail. But then the funeral came and went, and I think anyone who's been through grief, sat here or watching back at home, I think it's when the funeral comes and goes the true reality of what's happened hits you, and it hits you hard.
And everybody else goes, you know, because
they have to get back to life.
And they go back
you
to
know,
life.
And I did have lots of people around me for quite a period, and then after that funeral, that kind of battle, I remember just opening the cupboard in the kitchen, just seeing this bottle of gin there, and I thought, this voice in my head was just saying, come on, you deserve it. Just release yourself from how you're feeling for a moment.
People talk, Simon, about, you know, hitting rock bottom or their light bulb moment. I mean, how bad did it get? How much were you drinking?
A lot. I mean, it progressed over a few weeks, and I look
What
back...
about your son?
Well, there's a sense of shame around it, and I got asked this question on Instagram last week. You know, was Ethan aware of what was happening? And I think he was 8 at the time. I don't think then he was. And I'll be bold enough to say, and I think a lot of other people have been there, and messages I get, you become quite secretive. Yeah. So I had ways of pouring something into a Diet Coke can so people didn't realise there was something in there. But, of course, when friends were around, they'd begin to notice the change. So I was getting through a lot of vodka most nights. Do you think Ethan knew
a bottle of vodka every night?
Not every night, but quite a few nights, because momentarily, and this is the way that alcohol kids you, particularly if you're trying to deal with life-changing events, you're dealing with mental health, the loss of a job or relationship, whatever it might be, it kids you for a while. It releases you from how you're feeling, and you feel that numbness, and that's it, oh, I don't have to worry about this anymore. But then I found almost every single time the same pattern, which is after an hour or so, dark places.
Yeah.
I've helped alcoholics and I've lived with alcoholics, so I know what you went through. And only you could have decided to stop.
Yeah.
But what was the trigger thing that happened?
There are a few things. I had a lot of chats, quite honest chats. They weren't always easy with my wife, Derrina, who was finding it really hard. Yeah. Ethan was at an age where he fully understood when his dad had drunk too much. And I think it got a lot better over time, but it was still my go-to thing when I hit stress. Whether that was stress at work, stress at home, whatever it was.
Did it affect your work on screen and things?
No, thankfully not. And I just count myself blessed it didn't, because I know others it has done. And I just got to this stage where I didn't want to put them through it anymore. But I had a lot of conversations with a really good friend of mine called Carl, who never had a drink problem like I did, but had chosen to lead a sober lifestyle. And he said this phrase that really, really struck me over a year ago, which is, I've done this to be the best version of myself. And I kept thinking about this. I said, with alcohol in my life, because I haven't become, Ruth, some big preacher against alcohol. I'm really not. I'm not some anti-alcohol evangelist. What I am is someone who's just being honest enough to say there are some of us who just struggle with it, and some of us for whom it's a really bad relationship. And that idea of being the best version of yourself, being the best husband, being the best dad, being the best son, brother, friend, I couldn't do that with alcohol in my life. And I got to the stage last Christmas, thought, enough's enough. It's time to draw a line in the sand over which I won't step backwards again. And I'll be honest enough to say, yeah, it's not always easy at times, but without doubt, the best decision I've ever made. And it was my decision this time, not other people saying, we think you ought to stop.
And you've been sober for a year now, and you've got a new little baby, haven't you?
I know.
So,
Talitha.
amazing thing.
How old is she?
Well, she's 16 weeks today, but I have to do this thing. Derrina's miles better at this than I am after this year. I get emotional to see her. She was born 8 weeks prematurely. Wow. Derrina developed a complication very, very suddenly, so she arrived 8 weeks early. So we were plunged into the world of being in a NICU ward where she was for 3 weeks. They initially said 5 to 6 weeks, but, you know, if you know anything about premature babies, they are fighters from the off, because that's the world they're born into. They come early, so they've got to fight, and my goodness me, she's fought. And she's now gone from £3 to over £10. And she's been such a blessing.
And such an interesting age gap, because you've got a teenager.
I'm straddling both worlds. I was listening to your conversation on tagging as well. But that is... Honestly, Frankie, that is such a good word, being present. That's something else I've talked about. This was the first Christmas where I had no alcohol. And some people say, how are you feeling about Christmas? And I said, not a problem. And I don't have a problem with friends and family drinking around me. Absolutely no problem at all. But it was just that joy of feeling truly present. Listen, a bit of tiredness because you've got a newborn, but not that fog. And I had to work to do Premier League football for Amazon Prime, so I had games on Boxing Day and the day after. Doing those games, fresh-headed, clear-minded. It was wonderful.
But listen, Simon, we're so delighted for you. Thank you for talking about it.
Pleasure.
Because we know, even if it just helps one person out there recognise something that maybe needs changing, it's always worth doing that. So thank you for being so honest. We're so happy that you found happiness and love with Derrina and your lovely new baby, Talitha, and also your lovely son, Ethan. Thank you so much. Simon Thomas, everybody. And if you have been affected by Simon's story, anything that we've been talking about there is help available on the ITV website.